Hello, this is Mrs. Erda, and I'm going to be reading you chapters 6 and 7 from our One School, One Book masterpiece. So please join me. Chapter 6 starts on page 41, A New Kind of Trouble. When Marvin finally crawled through the cupboard wall into the family's living room, he was greeted by a dozen of his relatives in an anxious huddle. Their faces lit with relief when they saw him. Only Cousin Elaine seemed somewhat let down. His mother rushed to him, gathering him in her many legs. "Marvin, oh darling, where were you? You gave us such a fright." "What happened, son?" Papa pressed. "Elaine said you'd gone to deliver the nickel, but when Albert and I went looking for you, we couldn't find you anywhere." "We thought something terrible had happened to you," Elaine added, her voice grave. "Why, it could have been anything. You might have cut a leg in one of the floorboards, or the nickel could have fallen on top of you. Or you might have been crushed underfoot by one of the Pompadays making a midnight trip to the bath." "That's enough, Elaine," Uncle Albert said severely. But Marvin's grandmother was not so easily quieted. "Marvin, Marvin, have you forgotten about Uncle George?" she cried, hugging him close. "Is life so cheap?" Marvin sighed. Of course he hadn't forgotten about Uncle George. Who could forget about Uncle George, whose fate was the subject of frequent cautionary lectures by the adults in the family? The lead tuba player in the neighborhood band, Uncle George had ventured out one night with the bass guitarist to retrieve a piece of dry macaroni, his preferred instrument, from beneath the stove. They were intercepted by a particularly bold and hungry mouse. The guitarist escaped, but Uncle George was not so lucky. "I'm sorry," Marvin said. "I didn't mean for anyone to worry. I was in James's room, up on his desk. That's why you didn't see me, Papa." "But, darling, whatever were you doing there?" Mama asked anxiously. "James isn't allowed to eat in his room. You know that. There wouldn't have been any food." "No, I wasn't looking for food," Marvin hesitated, scanning the ring of puzzled faces. Even his cousin Billy, the wild one who'd lost a leg surfing in the garbage disposal, had never gone missing for an entire night. In the Beatles' world, that inevitably spelled doom. There were too many things that could go wrong. "Then what, Marvin?" Papa asked. "What were you doing?" Marvin didn't know how to explain it. The wonder of the drawing seemed too new to him, too fragile to share with his family. He took a deep breath. "I wanted to do something for James because his birthday party was so awful. You know how he got that ink set from his dad? Well, it was on his desk, with the cap off." "Don't tell me you fell in," Mama gasped. No, Mama." The family waited. "I dipped my front legs in the ink and drew a picture for him." The room fell silent. Marvin looked from his mother to his father. "A picture?" Papa asked. "What kind of picture?" "The scene outside his window," Marvin mumbled, studying the floor. "The building across the street with the tree and the street lamp. Just a tiny picture of it." "But Marvin," Mama said softly, "you could have been caught. And now, the picture? Well, what will James think? Is it even big enough for him to see it? And if it is, who will he think drew such a thing? He's too old to believe in fairies." Marvin paused. "He knows I did it." "What?" The cry came in unison from the assembled relatives, their faces frozen in horror. Marvin hurriedly explained what had happened. "But James won't tell anyone. I know he won't. He wouldn't do anything to get me in trouble." Mama shook her head. "Marvin, I know you like James. We all do. But he's a human. He has no loyalty to our kind. Humans can't be trusted." Papa turned to Uncle Albert. "We'll have to get the drawing. That's the only answer." "No, Papa, you can't," Marvin cried. "It was a present for James. I made it for him, and Mr. and Mrs. Pompaday have seen it now. They think he was the one who drew it. You should have seen how happy that made him. You can't take it away." "Marvin," his father said sternly, "I don't think you understand the gravity of this situation." His grandmother nodded. "I know you meant well, dear boy, but that drawing endangers all of us." Marvin turned desperately to his mother, but her response was firm. James can't keep it, darling, especially now that he knows you're responsible. There was a murmur of assent from the relatives. You'll have to get it back. Go now, while they're at church. Paper's heavy. You'll need a few extra legs. Marvin looked around the room in utter dejection. Okay, he said finally. Miserably, he led a small posse of beetles, consisting of his parents, Uncle Albert, Uncle Ted, and Elaine, out of the cupboard and through the quiet apartment in the direction of James's room. When the 6 beetles finally reached the desktop, the picture was right where James had left it, resting at an angle atop the scattered sheets of newspaper. Marvin felt his heart leap wildly at the sight of it. His parents stopped dead in their tracks. Marvin, Mama said, her voice hushed. Papa's jaw dropped. Son, you made this? Elaine crawled eagerly across the paper, gushing praise. Marvin, it's beautiful. The lines are so little and neat. It looks exactly like what's outside. And you drew it in the dark, too? I'd like to see a human try that. They can't see for beans at night. It's stunning, my boy, Uncle Albert agreed. There's no other word for it. Uncle Ted clapped Mama on the back. Marvin's an artist. We've got a real artist in the family. Do you remember Jeannie's murals, the one she made with toothpaste? She wasn't nearly this good. Marvin glowed with pride. Mama stroked his shell. It's a marvelous picture, darling, just marvelous. So beautiful and true. I can't imagine how you did it. No wonder James was pleased. What a gift! Papa studied the drawing regretfully. And what a shame we have to take it away. Just then they heard the front door unlatch and a commotion in the foyer, punctuated by William's trademark bellow. Oh, the Pompadays are home from church, Mama cried. Quick, try to lift it. The beetles surrounded the paper, 1 at each end, 2 on the long sides, and wedged their shells under the edges. They could hear James's sneakered feet thudding down the hall. There's no time, Papa hissed. We can't do it. Hurry, everyone, under the piggy bank and down the wall, Uncle Ted ordered. What, are we just going to leave Marvin's picture? Elaine protested. After all this, we're not taking it with us? Elaine, hush, Uncle Albert scolded. James will be here in 1 second. The beetles dashed for cover just as James came racing into the room. They clustered for a moment beneath the piggy bank. Then Uncle Ted climbed from the desk to the grooved wainscoting and started down the wall, leading the way. Marvin hung back in the shadow of the piggy bank. Papa, he whispered, can I stay for a little while? I want to see what he'll do with the drawing. His father hesitated, poised between the wooden edge of the desk and the wall. I don't think that's a good idea, son. But he might move it, and that way I'll know where it is. Papa frowned, considering. I suppose that would be helpful. His eyes followed the retreating line of beetles already halfway down the wall. All right, he decided, but you need to keep yourself hidden this time, Marvin. Do you understand? And we'll expect you home by dinner. Oh, I will be, Papa, Marvin promised. That's hours and hours away. Chapter 7 on page 49. It could be a Dürer. Cautiously, Marvin crawled over to his preferred spying place behind the desk lamp, watching James the whole time. James was leaning over the drawing, studying it, his face transfixed in a smile. Suddenly, he looked up. He peered around the top of the desk. Hey, little guy, he said softly. Marvin stiffened. He thought he was well hidden behind the lamp's brass base, but James's voice suggested otherwise. Remembering Papa's warning, he flattened himself and slid partway under the lamp. James kept talking, his voice calm. Little guy, that's what I'll call you, because you are a really little guy. He hesitated. Unless you're a girl. What? Marvin recoiled in alarm, despite his determination to keep still. Don't be scared. I won't hurt you, James said. He continued to study Marvin. I don't think you're a girl. I think you're a boy, like me. Marvin felt a flicker of relief, but stayed frozen at the edge of the lamp. You probably can't even understand me, huh? That's okay. My dad is coming in a few minutes. I can't wait to show him your picture. It's the most amazing thing. Marvin watched James lean his elbows on the desk, settling his face in his hands. But everyone thinks I did it. That's the only problem, and I don't know how to tell them. James's serious gray eyes tracked over to the lamp and stayed there. Marvin cringed. They'll never believe you did it anyway, so what's the point of telling them? No point, Marvin wanted to say. Don't bother, especially since the drawing won't even be here tomorrow. Best to forget all this. He gazed at the tiny picture mournfully. From the hall, they heard a loud thump on the door, and Mrs. Pompidet's muted greeting. A minute later, Carl Tarrick and Mrs. Pompidet appeared in the doorway. James, show your father your drawing. Look at this, Carl. You'll be shocked, I tell you. Look how tiny and elegant it is. Oh, I can't wait to show it to the Mortons and Sandra Ortiz at the gallery. Carl grinned at James and strode over to the desk, wearing a patient expression as if preparing to compliment the picture, no matter what he really thought. But when he saw Marvin's drawings, his eyes widened. He rubbed his beard, staring at it. May I? He asked James, reaching for the paper. James blushed. Sure, Dad. Marvin inched forward to watch Carl's reaction. James, his father said slowly. What did I tell you? Mrs. Pompidet clapped her hands. Isn't it wonderful? Carl walked to the window, lifting the drawing to the light. How did you do this? James swallowed. I just did it. Copied what was outside. His father brought the page close to his face, scrutinizing it, then held it at arm's length. The lines are so delicate and steady. I wouldn't have thought you could make a line this thin with the pen I gave you. James didn't say anything. Carl shook his head. It looks, well, it's ridiculous to say it, but it could be a Durr. Marvin and James both stared at him, not understanding. Carl was still lost in thought, tilting the drawing at different angles. I mean it, it's that good. Mrs. Pompidet glowed. Oh, yes, exactly, a Durr. What's that? James asked. What's a Durr? Albrecht Dürer, Carl explained, the German Renaissance artist, painter, engraver, did lots of pen and ink drawings, even a few miniatures like this, a long, long time ago. The detail in this is unbelievable, James. I can't get over it. James smiled joyfully at his parents. Marvin smiled joyfully at James. How long did it take you? His father continued. James squinted in the direction of the desk lamp and bit his lip. I don't know. I wasn't paying attention, he said, but it took a while. I bet so, his father said, whistling under his breath. He dropped his hand to James's back and rubbed the boy's thin neck, his voice rising in excitement. You know what we'll do, buddy? We'll go to the Met this afternoon. There's a drawing exhibit that just opened. Works by the old masters. Dürer, Bellini, Titian, Michelangelo. You have to see it. Here, we'll take your drawing with us. Marvin almost toppled out into the open. No, he wanted to cry. Stop him, James. But Carl grabbed a math textbook from the desk and carefully slipped the drawing into the cover. I want you to see firsthand how good this is, he told James. Really? James asked. You think it's as good as the pictures by those famous guys? I do. I really do, James. His father ruffled his hair. Mrs. Pompidet didn't look pleased. I don't think you should take that drawing anywhere, she said. What if something happens to it? I haven't even had a chance to show my friends. Carl laughed. Nothing will happen to it, he said, tucking the math book securely under one arm. I'll guard it with my life. This is really something. Now what? Marvin raced back and forth behind the base of the lamp, not knowing what to do. What if they took the drawing away for good? James and his parents were heading through the door when Marvin saw James hesitate. Oops, my jacket, he said to his father. He came back into the room, grabbing it from his closet, then paused by the desk, crouching near Marvin and shielding him from his parents' view. Come with us, he whispered, to see the drawings. Don't you want to? He rested one big pale finger on the desktop next to Marvin, his eyes urgent. Come on, I'll take care of you. We'll be back soon. Marvin was unable to think of anything but the drawing, which was now gone, out of the room, headed to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He dithered for one tormented moment, then scrambled on top of James's warm, fleshy finger. Here, I'll put you someplace safe, James whispered. He gently deposited Marvin in the pocket of his jacket. Frightened but thrilled, Marvin clung to the lip of the nylon fabric, peering out at the swiftly passing world from an unaccustomed height. It's the end of chapter 7. Enjoy the rest of our story. Masterpiece.